G'day guys, welcome back to the Life Outside podcast. We share stories from outside to hopefully inspire you to get outside as well. My name is Cam Bostock and I am solo today for this week's episode of the show, doing a bit of a Q&A. It's been a while since I've done a solo episode, answering questions from you guys, the listeners. Thank you as always for sending a bunch of questions in. I've actually been just getting a trickle of questions through from some of you guys just via Instagram DMs or even comments on previous episodes, but I also put a Q&A up on Instagram, so you guys sent through a ton of good questions related to the outdoors, hiking, and all the stuff that I typically talk about. If you guys do have any questions that you want me to answer or to chat about on the podcast, because I do plan to do more of these Q&A episodes intermittently throughout the weeks and months upcoming, feel free to send those through. Chuck me a DM on my personal Instagram account at Cam Bostock or at the Life Outside Pod on Instagram as well. Love hearing from you guys. I appreciate all the continued feedback and support for the show. The podcast it's been doing really well, and I'm having so much fun talking to interesting people every week on the show, but also doing these solo episodes here and there, talking about just the stuff that I love most, which is spending time in nature. If you've listened to the Life Outside podcast for a while, you've probably heard me talk about OptiVenture. It's a company I co-founded with a simple mission: to provide comprehensive and convenient supplementation solutions for hikers and outdoor adventurers. We sold out of our version 1 all-in-one supplement within 24 hours of launch, and we're excited to finally announce that we're launching version 2, which we're calling OptiVenture Core, this August. It's been a lengthy process, but we weren't going to cut any corners, and we're so proud of what we've created. A day-night formulation with the highest quality ingredients to optimize energy, recovery, immunity, inflammation, and support your gut both on and off the trail. For more information and to stay up to date, check our website, optiventure.co, and make sure to sign up to our email newsletter. Thanks for the support, and let's get into today's episode. Before I start, remember, rate the show 5 stars and follow the show wherever you're listening, whether it's Spotify, Amazon, or YouTube. Drop a comment, all of that good stuff. All the engagement helps us reach new people. And yeah, really appreciate you guys giving your feedback and sharing the love. Really enjoy making these episodes for you guys every week. All right, we're going to get straight into some questions. I've got a handful to get through. Probably won't be a super long episode, but we'll try and give some time to each question. Thanks again for sending them in. First question is from Liam on Instagram. How do you do resupplies, particularly on long trails like the Pacific Crest or Te Aroa, where you basically just walk into a supermarket and have to put together enough food for the next section on the fly? That's a good question. I don't think I've talked too much about resupplying on thru-hiking trails on any episode of the podcast before, or even online for that matter. It's actually quite a big part of thru-hiking is knowing how to resupply properly, and it's probably something that doesn't get talked about too much. The reason for that is probably that it's a very sort of individual thing, resupplying. You know what foods you like, and what I like isn't going to be necessarily applicable to you guys, but I can sort of go through some basic philosophy around resupplying if you are interested. And for me, that is typically just trying to get as much of a balanced diet as possible for the next section of trail. For example, if I've got a 5-day food carry ahead of me, I know that I'm going to need a certain amount of calories each day, and for everyone that's going to be different. I typically like bringing a lot of calories with me on trail. I don't lose much weight when I thru hike compared to some others, and that's because I eat a lot, and I typically carry probably a little bit more food than the average person per day. I don't know if I have a specific calorie amount that I go for. At this point, it's just intuition based on how much I know that I want to eat, but I am typically trying to get a fairly balanced nutritional profile out with me on trail. And most of my food is going to be pretty crap food, let's be honest. That's just through hiking, and it's pretty hard to get in amazing fresh food every day on trail, especially when you're out there for up to a week or whatever. But for me, it's always trying to just balance it as best as possible, trying to balance the macros and then trying to just fill in the gaps of micronutrition wherever I can. So typically I'm bringing out with me for meals, rice is a big one that I love bringing on trail, either pre-cooked or uncooked rice. And with the rice, I'll try to have some protein. So tuna, chicken, beef jerky or biltong. That's like a typical dinner for me. And then For the first couple of days post resupply, I love bringing out some fruit and vegetables. So like avocados and apples are two big ones for me that I usually try and have an apple and an avocado a day for like the first 2, maybe 3 days after resupply. But other than that, I'm just trying to get my favorite snack, stuff that I know I'm going to be craving on trail, that's going to give me good energy hits. And a lot of the time that's chocolate and that's candy and stuff like that. But I think one of the keys for resupplying for me is, obviously you want to think about weight. You don't want to carry food that is filled with water, which is typically what most fresh food is like. So dehydrated foods are king. It's going to be a lot lighter for your resupply, but also you want to think about packability as well, because even some dehydrated foods are quite bulky. And so there's a balance you want to find for sure with packability, weight, but also nutritional profile and calorie count. And it just comes with practice, to be honest. I think if you're a first time through hiker and you're doing your first ever resupply, just pack out a bit extra food than you think you'll need. And you'll sort of learn how much you do need and what foods you like out on trail as you go. But, typically people are getting a ton of ramen, rice, lots of, bars, protein bars, muesli bars, lots of candy, chips, chocolate. It's a lot of crap food, to be honest. And that's just typically what the body craves when you're out on trail. You want that salty, sugary food that's really high in calories and really high in carbohydrates, because that's what your body is just consistently burning out on trail. I typically try and get about 150 grams of protein in each day on trail as well. So when I'm resupplying, I'm really thinking hard about how am I going to get all this protein in. That comes from typically jerky, nuts, yeah, tuna packets, chicken packets, that kind of stuff. But that's one thing I really struggle with, actually, is getting enough protein on trail. And this is probably all a good segue into why we created my company, OptiVenture. I co-founded this outdoor nutrition company because it just really is hard to get micronutrition out on trail. Macronutrition is a bit easier. Getting your carbs, fats, and proteins is typically doable. But some of the foods I've talked about that I typically resupply with just don't have a nutrient profile that's going to be conducive to longevity and high performance for a long period of time on trail. So we've created like an all-in-one supplement that you take out with you. You're going to have your ramens, your candy, and your lollies. You're going to get your carbs and your fats, which is going to fuel your energy levels throughout the day. But then the supplement that you also bring along will hopefully fill in those micronutritional gaps and keep all the processes in your body working as they should, keep your gut happy, and keep your recovery on point. So, hey, if you haven't checked out OptiVenture yet, head to optiventure.co. We're probably about a month or two away from releasing our next all-in-one supplement, version 2 of our main product, called OptiVenture Core. Yeah, we're in production as I record this episode, and by the time it's released, we'll be probably not too far away from launching. So if you've got a big hike coming up, check out our website, check out our socials. You get a bunch more information about what's in the product, why you need it, and how it can sort of help you make it to the end of a long trail. But yeah, I don't know if I answered that question properly about resupplying, but it's one of those things that's very individualized and takes a bit of practice to really nail over the long term. Speaking of OptiVenture as well, we're planning to release a lot more products over the coming months and years, including a trail protein that we're sort of in the current ideation phase about, and electrolytes and some other things that are just going to basically level up hikers on trail with their health and performance. If you guys have any suggestions for us, things you'd like to see, any feedback, yeah, feel free to send it our way. We always appreciate it. We're just trying to build products that are going to work best for hikers. All right, next question from Samuel. What are some upgrades to gear that you've made over time that have made the biggest difference in your hikes? That's a great question. And I think the simple answer really is just gear that is lighter. Dropping pack weight makes the biggest tangible difference on trail. Everything's easier. Your body's going to respond better to higher loads if you have less weight on your back. And that has pretty much been my journey with gear over the last, 6 years of multi-day hiking. Is just every time I am upgrading my gear, it's basically just to make my pack overall lighter. And there's so many cool technologies out there now where gear is just getting lighter and lighter and lighter, and it ends up costing quite a bit of money. And so I always suggest people to just sort of go out with what you've got to start with. But if you're really looking to optimize your gear list, the main thing you want to think about is what can do the job, as good or, a similar level as the gear I've currently got, but it's lighter. That's the main upgrade you want to make. And so, I'm currently rocking a pretty pretty ultralight gear list, just based on years of slowly lightening my pack. And I'll drop my gear list, my current gear list, or at least the one I used on my most recent through hike, in the description below if you guys want to have a peruse through it. But I've done a whole nother episode on through hiking gear with my mate Tom, so I'll link that below as well. You guys can listen to it if you're really interested into diving deep into the through hiking gear and going really ultralight. Jenny asks, how much time do you spend on content creation when on a trip? Do you ever feel like it detracts from the outdoor experience? How do you balance that? That's probably the question I get asked the most and have been asked the most over the years. Balancing content creation and just enjoying the outdoor experience. And I've always had the same answer, which is that creating content on trail only enhances the experiences for me. There is no downside for me. Yeah, it's a bit of extra work on trail, so maybe it exhausts me a bit more and I feel more tired overall. Definitely more like sort of mentally tired. But other than that, it makes the experience in the outdoors better for me. I think the main reason for that is I'm often more present. I'm thinking about, shots I want to get or things I want to share. And so I'm always looking for those angles and those viewpoints and that kind of stuff. And I'm putting the extra effort in to take that side trail because maybe it'll look cool on video. And that's not the only reason I'm doing that, but I do get to see more, I feel like, filming. And the other thing is I get to look back on my outdoor experiences years after I've done them in quite a lot of detail, which for me is just the most incredible thing. I always go back and watch my vlogs from trails that I've done in the past, and to be able to relive those experiences in such a sort of tangible ways is really powerful. So it not only enhances the experience while I'm there on trail, but forever that experience is sort of enhanced and I get access to it whenever I want, which I love so much. And to be honest, I get so much energy and joy from inspiring other people into nature because nature has brought me so much joy and fulfillment. When I see other people going out because of a video that I filmed, that is just, it's just so awesome. And so it's just another reason that sort of enhances the overall experience of sharing the outdoors with other people. And I don't film every trip either. I think there's a few things that people just don't see from the outside. I probably film my big trips for sure pretty intensely, but most of my smaller backpacking trips and a lot of my other outdoor adventures don't get filmed at all. So I have plenty of time in nature where I'm not even thinking about recording. And of course, that's a really cool experience as well. And also the other thing is when I'm through hiking and filming like a daily vlog, for example, I probably record probably an absolute maximum of 20 or 30 minutes of footage every day. And if you look at it in the grand scheme of things, I'm walking for 10 to 12 hours every day on a typical through hike. And obviously I'm out there for 24 hours a day. So if I'm filming for 20 or 30 minutes out of those 12 hours on trail, it's really just such a small portion that I've ever got my camera out. And obviously I cut down that 20 minutes of footage into a 1 minute video for Instagram. And it almost seems like I've just had the camera out all day, but really it's a very small portion of the day I still get to enjoy my time out there without the camera out. Not that it particularly is a detriment for me personally anyway. Okay, Cohen asks, what are the main resources you use to plan your hikes? Good question. It's funny because I don't typically do a lot of planning when I'm out on a trail. I'll just typically figure out how to get to the trailhead and then just go walking. I like not knowing what's coming up. Even on the long through hikes, I just like winging it and going day by day kind of thing. But there's definitely some tools that I use, especially if I'm planning a route that isn't like a well walked or official trail. I'll use some apps to plan out routes and upload a GPX file to my phone or my watch or whatever so I can help navigate. So I guess some of the apps that I use, which is pretty much what I would consider to be the main resources for planning hikes for me. Far Out is the app I use for through hiking. Incredible app for long distance trails. Not every trail is on there, but the trails that does have, typically there's just so much information. You've obviously got the route, but then all the icons for every point of interest along the trail, every water source, campsite, that kind of stuff. And then because Fire Out's like a community-based app, people can comment on each icon and you can get so much information about trail conditions, water levels, and just everything you need to know. It's a great resource for before you go on a trail, but also just while you're on the trail itself. All trails are similar for that. a lot of times when I'm just doing a 2-day hike or a day hike, I'll go on all trails and look at all the comments and get a good idea of what to expect. Great for navigating as well. And as far as like route planning, I've been using a couple apps for that. I use Garmin Explore, which is quite good, especially if you've got a Garmin watch. Another app called Gaia. It's a great one for sort of planning your own route and navigating as well. So there's a few apps that I use, both before and on the trail, but typically I don't do too much research outside of that. All right, next question from Ed. What country are you interested in hiking in next? Oh, there's so many places I want to go, and the list keeps growing. When this episode currently releases, I'll probably be hiking somewhere in Europe. So I'm going to avoid saying any of the countries that I'm currently exploring as you guys listen to this. But probably one of the ones at the top of my list would be the Patagonian countries, so like Chile and Argentina. I've just heard so many incredible things from the hiking in those regions, and there's obviously so many trails, so much multi-day hiking, and so that's something that I'm really looking forward to going and exploring over the next year or so, hopefully, and climbing some mountains and doing some routes. Yeah, I think that would be top of the list. I'd love to explore like the stars in the Middle East a bit. I'm hearing more and more about some epic trails over there, and even Eastern Europe. There's just so much out there to explore. Hey, slowly ticking them off one by one. Simone asks, what gear are you using for filming editing while on trail? Do you use a tripod to film? Yeah, typically I keep it really simple. That's what I tell people who ask me for tips, for like daily vlogging or creating content on trail. Is really the key thing is simplicity, because it can be pretty hard to keep up with the filming, editing, and posting while you're out there. So for me, I just use my phone, and that's literally it. It's my iPhone, full stop. I don't typically have a tripod. I don't bring fancy microphones. I don't bring a big camera. Maybe I'll bring all that stuff on like a 2 to 5 day hike if it's quite short, and I'm wanting to take more photos, and I don't really mind as much about simplicity or like weight of my gear. But on long through hiking trails, it's just my phone. That's it. Keeps the weight down. I don't have to charge different things or worry about keeping all this different gear in the right spot and keeping it safe and dry and that kind of stuff. Just my phone, and I'll edit on my phone, do my voiceovers on my phone with just my phone mic and all that stuff. I typically edit on an app called CapCut. That's just the one I use. There's lots of good apps out there, but yeah, I keep it really simple. Lana asks, what tent would you recommend for through hiking? The lightest one for one person. Yeah, there's a lot of good lightweight tents out there these days. My favorite by far is the Durston X-Mid. There's a one-person DCF version that is super, super light. The X-Mid Pro one-person tent with Dyneema. Yeah, so it weighs 440 grams. 440 grams or 15 and a half ounces. So ridiculously light. I don't think the X-Men Pro is like the lightest tent on the market. I think there's a tent that the Z packs do that's like technically the lightest tent, but I love the X-Med Pro. It's the one I've used for most of my big hikes over the last year or two. That's what I'd recommend. It's not cheap. These ultralight tents, especially the ones with Dyneema composite fabrics, are typically pretty expensive, but it's because they're very high quality and very lightweight. And obviously, the lightest weight tents are going to be trekking pole tents. If you have a freestanding tent, it's going to be it's going to be heavier overall because you're carrying tent poles. But if you're already carrying trekking poles and you want to go lightweight, it's an absolute no-brainer to carry with you a trekking pole tent. The only downside is there may be some tent sites that are a bit harder to set up at. And it takes a bit more sort of space because you have to stake your tent out. You don't really have a choice to not stake it like you do with a freestanding tent. But yeah, X-Med Pro, that's my recommendation. Steven asks, would you consider going on a bike packing trip once instead of hiking? If so, where would you cycle? Yeah, I'm super interested in bike packing. I've done one trip before. There's a trail here in Western Australia where I'm from called the Mundabiddi, which is like a long distance off road bike packing route, mostly on trails. It's incredible. It's about 1,000 kilometers long. So I rode that in 2022 with a friend of mine, and yeah, epic experience. I loved every second of it. We had terrible weather, and we had like so much chafing, and we had a lot of issues, but it was still the best time ever. And I've talked to so many people who've done a lot of bikepacking, even on the podcast, and it sounds incredible. The difference between hiking and bikepacking is you can go a lot further in a lot less time on a bike. And obviously, you're limited in where you can go because bikes cannot go everywhere that you can walk. That's obvious, but I think I'm really interested in doing some more bikepacking into the future. Where, I don't know. I think it'd be cool to bikepack a bit more around Australia because it's my home and it'd be a cool new way to see it. But obviously, there's some incredible routes across Europe and all over the world that would be super interesting to explore one day. Probably should get a proper road bike though if I'm gonna start doing that. But yeah, it's gonna happen at some point for sure. Fernando asks, "What's next? Do you plan on hiking the Continental Divide Trail or the Appalachian Trail?" So many trails I want to hike. Those two are obviously very high up on the list of trails that are on my bucket list, but I don't think I'll be hiking either anytime soon. It's just, such a big commitment to be away from my wife and family for, 5, 6 months, which is what it would take. But the Triple Crown of through hiking in the USA is, of course it's up there and something that I'd love to do one day. What's next? Well, as you guys are listening to this, I'm on the Camino de Santiago, so that's the next sort of long trail that I'm doing. There's a few other long trails in Australia that I'm thinking of ticking off this year as well, but there's always about a million through hiking trails that I want to do. None of them are really locked in the plans just yet. Sam asks, top 5 trails in Western Australia. Oh, I could talk about Western Australian trails all day. Obviously, this is where I live, where I was born and raised, and where I really got into hiking. If I had to narrow that down to top 5 in Western Australia, that's hard. We don't have many mountains in WA, and so we don't have very many mountain trails, which makes a lot of sense, which is typically my favorites. But we also do have just a really awesome, diverse range of hiking trails across the state. Number one for me is definitely the Bibbulmun Track. That's one of my favorite trails on planet Earth. It's our longest trail, one of the longest trails in Australia, 1,000 kilometers long, and it's incredibly diverse and really beautiful hikes through forests, along coastlines, over some smaller mountains and some hills, and it's just overall an epic trip. And obviously, it's like a 30 to 40 day hike for most people, so it's a bit of a commitment, but just absolutely awesome. The other reason the Bibbulmun Track actually is super cool is there's like really nice campsites, shelters, toilets, and like water tanks every 20 kilometers along the trail. So it's super accessible for sort of like your everyday cobber to get out there for a couple of days or even the whole thing. It's a very forgiving trail because of that. So that would be my number one for sure. The Cape to Cape Track would be number two. It's another famous trail in Western Australia, like a 5 to 7 day trek down south of Perth along the coastline between Cape Naturalist and Cape Lewin. Just super beautiful. Sam, who asked this question, just walked the Cape to Cape, I'm pretty sure. And so you know how good it is, mate. Just super beautiful. Western Australian coastline is magic. And so walking along it for 5 to 7 days can't really be a bad thing. Number 3, I would probably say the Hakea Trail. It's like a 2 day hike down in Fitzgerald River National Park, south coast of Western Australia. Another coastal trail, stunning, absolutely stunning. That's one of my favorite trails. I've done it a couple of times, even though it's pretty far from the big city, about a 7 hour drive. And then I probably should say a couple of day hikes rather than just all these multi-day adventures. Bald Head Trail in Albany on the south coast, that has to be in the top 5. Iconic trail, one of the most beautiful trails in Australia. It's only a 15-kilometer return trail out in this peninsula down in Torndrup National Park, but so beautiful. You got like just big drop-offs either side of the trail down to the ocean. Incredible beaches, incredible scenes, incredible trail. Bald Head would be up there. And then I'll probably, we have one mountain range down in the southwest of Western Australia, which is really rugged and actually feels mountainous. And so I have to say a trail from down there. I'll say Bluff Knoll, which is probably the most famous hike in Western Australia, but it is amazing. 1,000-meter peak, incredible views. There's also a multi-day hike that includes Bluff Knoll, which is sort of the tallest mountain in the area, called the Stirling Ridge Walk. And so that's another really awesome adventure. But yeah, we have some good trails here in Western Australia. I think it's underrated how good our trails are. We just don't have any big mountains, which is sort of the one big downside. Aurel asks, when do the Optiventa electrolytes drop? Good question. We're still in the testing phase of our electrolytes. Most of our focus has gone into building our all-in-one supplements because that's sort of our main offering, and there's something that we're really passionate about bringing to the hiking and outdoor market. So the electrolytes are probably, still a while away, maybe half a year. But yeah, we are working on bringing pretty much a really unique and specified formula to the outdoor adventure market, because we don't believe the outdoor market has been served adequately in a lot of categories, but electrolytes is one of them. There are electrolytes built for hikers. There's electrolytes built for CrossFitters and marathoners and the everyday gym goer, but not specifically for the needs of the outdoor hiker who is, has very specific needs. There's not many other sports or lifestyles where you're out on trail for 12 hours a day, moving the entire time, going through all these, unique environments and conditions. So yeah, we're working hard on the electrolyte, and we'll make sure to keep you guys in the loop, of course. Chris asks, you sometimes have to rely on hitchhiking during hikes. Any interesting stories of people you have met or any sketchy situations? I've hitchhiked a lot in quite a few countries now as well. And I've never felt super unsafe for the most part. Most people are really nice. I feel like if they're willing to pick you up, they're typically a good person. That's just been my experience anyway. There's been a couple of moments hitchhiking, like in the car, where I was like, I might die. And that's typically just due to like driving on sketchy roads. Like I remember one time in New Zealand when I hitchhiked with this guy to get out of like a pretty remote location, and it was just a dirt road, and I was very, very lucky to get a ride. But he was obviously a local who was very used to driving on these windy mountain roads. But as someone who wasn't used to that, his driving style was crazy. He was literally like skidding around corners, and next to the road was a massive drop off. And so like if you skidded out, you would go down this mountainside, and he was just very, very casually just like drifting around corners and driving way too fast for the conditions. And I was like holding on. You could probably see that I was holding on, but it was a little sketchy. But he was like a great dude. We had awesome chats. And then once we got out of the mountains and back into town, it was like super chill. But it's just like, I was not ready for that. There was another situation, I think I've told the story on the podcast before, where my mate Dan and I were hiking in Victoria, and we hitchhiked, and this guy was driving 110 kilometers down a country road, 110 kilometers an hour down a country road, and there was a T junction up ahead, and he just didn't see that it was a T junction and had to slam on the brakes last minute, and our lives flashed before our eyes. So a couple of sketchy situations for sure, but for the most part, no issues at all. And I've met so many interesting people, so many just legends from all walks of life who are willing to pick you up. And that's the best part about hitchhiking, is just chatting to random people and getting to know them. And there was times in the USA where we hitchhiked, and the people that we got a ride with, ended up inviting us to stay at their home, or showing us around town, or cooking us a meal, or buying us a meal or something. And it's just like the kindness, it really shines through when you're trying to get a ride as a filthy hiker out on a trail somewhere. So I love it, and yeah, it's really a great way to get around, to be honest. Jane asks, if you were hiking with a buddy in the middle of nowhere and one of you was bitten by a tiger snake, what would you do? Good question. Good question. Yeah, that's a typical concern of a lot of people who visit Australia and go hiking, and it's a valid concern for a lot of Aussies who go hiking in the bush. There are snakes out there, and tiger snakes are particularly prevalent, especially along the southern half of Australia. A lot of the hiking that I do here in Western Australia, there's tiger snakes around, and if you get bit, you're going to be in trouble if you don't know what to do. That's for sure. But yeah, I guess the typical basic rule is, if you get bit by a snake in Australia, you lie down and you don't move, and you basically attempt to get your heart rate lower, because the worst thing you could do is to panic, for one, and then also, try and run or hike fast to get help. It might seem logical to try and leave the trail and go find a road or go find people to help you, but the last thing you want to do is to help circulate any potential venom that was, injected into you from the bite. And so the first thing you want to do, yeah, say my friend was bitten, I would say lie down, and then, always carrying a snake bandage onto trail with me in Australia, at least, which is like a specific bandage made for snake bites. And if you wrap the wound site and then you wrap up and down the limb that the bite was on, or the area that the bite was on, you can slow the blood flow to from that area, and so the venom has a lower chance of circulating to vital organs. So yeah, lie down, wrap the wound, and then obviously notify emergency services. You should be hiking with a PLB or a satellite communicator, which I always do as well. I click the SOS button, or if I have reception, call emergency services, get someone out to you. Then they'll sort of handle it from there and hopefully give you some antivenin or whatever's needed. So, it's pretty basic. If you get bit by a snake, you lie down, you wrap the wound, you locate emergency services to get you the hell out of there and try not to get out yourself. Most bites in Australia are non-deadly because the snake doesn't inject any venom. Typically, most people that get bit, bites are very rare in the first place, but typically if you get bit, you're not going to be in any danger. But it is always best to assume that you've been envenomated and take the appropriate steps to not die. I've luckily never been bit by a snake. I've stepped on a snake multiple times, and I've stepped on a tiger snake before, but I haven't been bit yet, which is nice, which is very, very nice. All right, that's all the questions I have for today, and that's about as long as I wanted to chat this morning as well. 30-minute quick Q&A. Hopefully you guys found this interesting and informative and helpful in some way. Like I said at the beginning, if you do have any further questions for me or for the podcast or for future guests, whatever it may be, feel free to send us a message, comment on this episode on your listening platform of choice. And yeah, we'll get some more Q&As out there. It's kind of fun to just answer questions and talk about some things that might not pop up in a typical episode of the show. So thanks so much for listening, guys. Appreciate all the support as usual. Like I said at the beginning, rate the show 5 stars if you enjoyed. Helps out the pod a ton. And I really appreciate you all. All right, see you in the next one. Cheers.